The dirt under Dorothy Marlowe's fingernails had been there so long she could scarcely remember what clean hands looked like. And at 37 years old, she figured it hardly mattered anymore since no man in Sloan, Nevada would look twice at a woman her age anyway. She straightened from the vegetable patch behind the small, weathered house she shared with her younger sister Clara and pressed both palms against the small of her aching back. The late afternoon sun of July 1878 beat down mercilessly on the dusty town, turning everything the color of old parchment. Dorothy wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist and surveyed the pathetic tomato plants struggling to survive in the unforgiving Nevada soil. Every drop of water was precious here. Every vegetable that managed to grow felt like a small miracle. The back door slammed open and Clara emerged, her pretty face twisted in that particular expression of exasperation Dorothy had come to know too well over the years. At 29, Clara still possessed the kind of delicate beauty that turned heads, though her sharp tongue often sent those same heads turning right back around. She planted her hands on her hips and stared at Dorothy with obvious disapproval. "You are absolutely covered in dirt," Clara said, her voice carrying that perpetual note of criticism. "Honestly, Dorothy, you look like you have been rolling in the garden rather than tending it." Dorothy brushed ineffectually at her worn calico dress. The tomatoes needed attention. "If we want to eat this winter, someone has to do the work." "Speaking of which," Clara continued, following Dorothy as she gathered up her tools, "Margaret Patterson stopped by while you were out here playing in the mud. She wanted to tell me that her daughter Ellen just got engaged to that nice banker from Virginia City." "That is wonderful for Ellen," Dorothy said genuinely, though she could sense where this conversation was heading. "Ellen is 34 years old," Clara pressed on. Margaret was practically in tears of relief. She said she had almost given up hope of Ellen ever finding a husband. Dorothy carried her tools to the small shed and began putting them away with methodical care. "Then, I am happy Ellen found someone. You not see what I am saying?" Clara's voice rose in pitch. "Ellen is 34 and people thought she was too old. Dorothy, you are 37. You are too old to wed now. You have missed your chance and spending your days covered in garden dirt is not going to change that fact." The words stung more than Dorothy cared to admit, though she kept her face carefully neutral. She had heard variations of this speech from Clara countless times over the past few years, each iteration cutting a little deeper than the last. The truth was that Dorothy had never been a beauty like Clara. She was tall and angular where Clara was petite and curved, practical where Clara was flirtatious, serious where Clara was charming. And while Clara had entertained numerous suitors over the years, only to reject them one by one for various perceived failings, Dorothy had received precious few offers of courtship. There had been Samuel, of course. Sweet, serious Samuel who had courted her when she was 23. They had planned to marry, had even set a date, but then he had died of pneumonia that brutal winter of 1864. After that, Dorothy had thrown herself into keeping the household running, into caring for Clara after their parents passed from fever, into simply surviving in this harsh land that seemed determined to grind down anyone foolish enough to try to make a life in it. "I am well aware of my age, Clara," Dorothy said quietly, closing the shed door with more force than necessary. "You need not remind me constantly." "Someone needs to," Clara retorted. "You act as if you still have all the time in the world. You do not. If you had any sense, you would have accepted Thomas Brennan when he proposed 3 years ago." Thomas Brennan was 56 years old and looking for a nursemaid, not a wife, Dorothy shot back, her patience finally fraying. "He told me quite plainly that he needed someone to care for him in his declining years." And what is so wrong with that? At least you would have been married. At least you would have had some security. Now look at you, 37 years old and all alone, digging in the dirt like a common farmhand. Dorothy opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, suddenly too tired for this argument. She walked past Clara toward the house, desperate for some water and a moment of peace. Clara followed her inside, still talking. "I am only trying to help you see reason," Clara continued, her voice taking on that martyred tone Dorothy despised. "I worry about you. What will become of you when I marry and move away? You will be all alone." "You have been saying you are going to marry for 10 years, Clara. Forgive me if I do not start packing your trunk just yet." The words came out more sharply than Dorothy had intended, but she was past caring. She filled a tin cup with water from the pitcher on the table and drank deeply. Clara's face flushed red. "I have standards unlike some people. I will not settle for just anyone simply because I am desperate." "I never said you should. You implied it." Dorothy set down her cup and turned to face her sister. "Clara, I am tired. I am dirty. I am hot. Can we please not do this today?" But Clara was just getting started. "Margaret also mentioned that the church social is coming up in 2 weeks. Perhaps you should make an effort to attend and actually speak to people instead of hiding in the corner like you usually do." "I do not hide in corners." "You absolutely do. You stand there with that sour expression on your face, and you wonder why no man approaches you." "I do not have a sour expression. You have one right now." Dorothy pressed her lips together and counted to 10 in her head. This was an old dance between them, familiar and exhausting. Clara, for all her beauty and charm, had a talent for finding exactly the words that would hurt most. And Dorothy, practical and sturdy Dorothy, always ended up being the target. "I am going to wash up," Dorothy said finally, ending the conversation before it could escalate further. She grabbed the wash basin and headed for her small bedroom, closing the door firmly behind her. Alone at last, Dorothy allowed herself a moment of weakness. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and stared at her work-roughened hands. Clara was right about one thing at least. At 37, Dorothy was well past the age most women married. In a place like Sloan, Nevada, where men outnumbered women significantly, being unmarried at her age marked her as odd, perhaps even defective in some way. But what Clara did not understand, what she had never understood, was that Dorothy had made her peace with her situation. After Samuel died, something inside her had closed off. She had built walls around her heart, practical walls like everything else about her, and she had convinced herself that a quiet life of solitude was preferable to the risk of loving and losing again. Still, sometimes in the dark of night, Dorothy allowed herself to wonder what it might be like to have someone to share the burden with. Someone strong and kind who might look at her work-worn face and see something worth cherishing. But those were foolish thoughts, the kind of romantic notions that a practical woman of 37 had no business entertaining. Dorothy poured water into the basin and began washing the day's dirt from her hands and face. Through the thin walls, she could hear Clara moving about the kitchen, no doubt preparing supper with that particular aggressive clanging of pots that meant she was still angry. They would eat in tense silence, as they so often did these days, and then retreat to their separate corners of the small house. It was not the life Dorothy had imagined for herself when she was young and still believed in happy endings. But it was the life she had, and she had learned long ago that surviving in Nevada meant accepting reality, no matter how harsh it might be. 3 days later, Dorothy was in town purchasing supplies when she first heard about the mountain man. She was in Cooper's general store, carefully counting out coins for flour and sugar, when Mrs. Henderson bustled in with news that had clearly set the whole town buzzing. "Have you heard?" Mrs. Henderson announced to the store at large, not bothering with pleasantries. "There is a mountain man come down from the Sierras. He is staying at the boarding house, and Molly Winters says he is the biggest man she has ever laid eyes on." Dorothy continued counting her coins, only half listening. Mountain men occasionally came through Sloane on their way to somewhere else, rough characters who made most of the town's respectable citizens nervous. "Molly says he has muscles like you would not believe," Mrs. Henderson continued, warming to her subject, "and hair down past his shoulders. She said he looks like he could break a man in half with his bare hands." "How barbaric," Mrs. Cooper said from behind the counter, though Dorothy detected a note of interest in her voice. "Oh, but he is very polite," Molly said, "soft-spoken even. He paid for a week in advance and has not caused any trouble at all, just keeps to himself mostly." Dorothy gathered her purchases and prepared to leave, but Mrs. Henderson had more to say. "Apparently he is looking for land. Can you imagine? A mountain man wanting to settle down. Molly thinks he might be looking for a wife too, though of course, what respectable woman would want to marry such a wild creature?" The ladies in the store all murmured their agreement, though Dorothy noticed that several of them looked rather intrigued by the notion. She excused herself and stepped out into the bright afternoon sunshine, her mind already on the dozen other tasks she needed to complete before heading home. She was loading her purchases into the wagon when she saw him. He was crossing the street toward the boarding house, and even from a distance, Dorothy could see that Mrs. Henderson had not exaggerated. The man was enormous, easily over 6 feet tall with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. He wore buckskin trousers and a simple homespun shirt that did nothing to hide the powerful muscles of his arms and chest. His hair was indeed long, a dark brown streaked with lighter shades from the sun, and it hung loose around a face that was weathered and strong-jawed. But it was not his size or appearance that made Dorothy pause in her work. It was the way he moved, with a kind of quiet confidence that suggested a man completely at ease with himself and his place in the world. There was no swagger to his walk, no attempt to intimidate or impress. He simply existed, solid and sure as the mountains he came from. As if sensing her gaze, the mountain man turned and looked directly at her. From across the dusty street, his eyes met hers, and Dorothy felt a strange jolt run through her, like touching a live wire. His eyes were a pale blue, startling against his tanned skin, and for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they simply looked at each other. Then someone called out to him, breaking the spell, and he turned away. Dorothy released a breath she had not realized she was holding and quickly finished loading her wagon. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she was annoyed with herself for the reaction. She was a grown woman of 37, far too old to be rattled by a stranger's gaze. She climbed up onto the wagon seat and gathered the reins, determinedly pushing the encounter out of her mind. The mountain man was nothing to do with her. He would conduct whatever business had brought him to Sloane and then disappear back into the wilderness where he belonged. That was how these things always went. But as she drove the wagon back toward home, Dorothy found her mind returning again and again to those startling blue eyes and the strange feeling that had passed between them. It was foolishness, she told herself firmly. Pure foolishness. And at 37, she had no time or patience for foolish notions. Clara, naturally, had already heard all about the mountain man by the time Dorothy arrived home. She met Dorothy at the door, practically vibrating with excitement. Is it true what they are saying? Is he really as enormous as a grizzly bear? Dorothy began unloading supplies, her movements deliberately casual. He is a very large man, yes. Now please help me with these flour sacks before I wrench my back. Did you see him? Did you speak to him? I saw him briefly. We did not speak. Why would we? I do not know the man. Clara followed her into the kitchen, undeterred by Dorothy's obvious reluctance to discuss the topic. Margaret Patterson says he is looking to buy land and build a cabin. Can you imagine? They say he has been trapping up in the mountains for years and has saved up quite a bit of money. Good for him. Dorothy began putting away supplies, hoping Clara would lose interest and move on to some other subject. They also say, Clara continued, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper despite the fact that they were alone in the house, that he is looking for a wife, a proper wife to settle down with. Dorothy nearly dropped the tin of coffee she was holding. That is nothing but gossip and speculation. Perhaps, but think about it, Dorothy. Why else would a mountain man come to town looking to buy land? He is ready to settle down, and a man does not settle down unless he plans to marry. Or perhaps he is simply tired of living in the wilderness and wants a proper roof over his head. Not everything is about marriage, Clara. But Clara had that look in her eye, the one that meant she was plotting something. Dorothy recognized it with a sinking feeling in her stomach. You should make his acquaintance, Clara said decisively. You should find some excuse to speak with him. I should do no such thing. Why not, Dorothy? When was the last time a single man came to Sloane, an available man with money and prospects? He is a mountain man, Clara. He probably cannot even read. What would I possibly have in common with such a person? Does that really matter? He is looking for a wife. You are in desperate need of a husband. It is perfect. Dorothy slammed the cupboard door harder than necessary. I am not in desperate need of anything, and I will not throw myself at a stranger simply because he has muscles and money. Have some dignity, Clara. Dignity, Clara's voice rose. You want to talk to me about dignity? You, who spends every day covered in dirt, growing old and alone. There is no dignity in becoming a spinster, Dorothy. There is only loneliness and regret. The words hit their mark, as Clara had surely known they would. Dorothy felt her throat tighten with emotion she refused to show. I need to start supper, she said quietly, turning away so Clara would not see her face. Clara sighed, some of the fight going out of her. I am sorry. I did not mean that the way it sounded. I just want you to be happy, Dorothy. I want you to have what every woman deserves, a husband and a family. Is that so wrong? No, Dorothy admitted. But you cannot force these things, Clara. And I am not going to make a fool of myself chasing after some mountain man who has probably never given me a moment's thought. But later that night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the Nevada wind howl around the house, Dorothy found herself thinking about those blue eyes again. She wondered what it would be like to be looked at by a man who saw her as something other than the aging spinster sister, the practical one, the one who would never wed. Stop it. She told herself firmly. You are being ridiculous. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally did, her dreams were full of mountains and a man with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world. The following Sunday, Dorothy found herself at the church social despite her better judgment. Clara had nagged and pleaded and finally resorted to tears, until Dorothy had agreed to go, if only to have some peace in the house. Now she stood in the church hall, wearing her best dress, which was still rather plain and out of fashion, watching the other townspeople mingle and gossip. Clara had immediately disappeared into a cluster of young women, all of them giggling and whispering behind their hands. Dorothy knew without asking that they were discussing the mountain man, who had become the primary topic of conversation in Sloane over the past week. Dorothy had almost convinced herself to slip out early when the hall's door opened and he walked in. The effect on the room was immediate. Conversations faltered and stopped. Women stared openly. Men sized him up with wary eyes. The mountain man seemed oblivious to the attention, or perhaps simply accustomed to it. He removed his hat, revealing that long, dark hair, and looked around the room with those startling blue eyes. Dorothy froze in her corner, simultaneously hoping he would not notice her and desperately hoping he would. It was a ridiculous contradiction that made her feel like a foolish girl rather than a sensible woman of 37. Reverend Thomas approached the mountain man with an outstretched hand and a welcoming smile. Dorothy could not hear what they were saying, but she watched as the Reverend introduced the newcomer to various members of the congregation. The mountain man shook hands carefully, as if aware of his own strength and concerned about crushing someone's fingers. He spoke little, just nodded politely and listened as people chattered at him. "That is Flynn Vandermeer," a voice said beside Dorothy, making her jump. She turned to find Martha Chen, one of the few women in town Dorothy considered a genuine friend. Martha was a widow who ran a successful seamstress shop and had no patience for gossip or foolishness. "How do you know his name?" Dorothy asked. "I listen, unlike you who stands in corners pretending to be invisible." Martha smiled to take the sting from her words. "Apparently, he has been trapping and hunting in the Sierra Nevada mountains for the past 15 years, made quite a fortune from it too. Now he wants to buy land and build a proper home." "Why here? Why Sloan?" Martha shrugged. "Why not? It is as good a place as any, I suppose. And he does have family connections in Nevada from what I understand. His uncle used to own property near Virginia City." Dorothy watched as Flynn Vandermeer continued making his rounds through the room, always polite, always careful, but never quite relaxed. She wondered what it must be like for him, coming down from the solitude of the mountains to face all this scrutiny and judgment. "He has been asking about available land," Martha continued. "Specifically, about the old Morrison property up in the foothills." Dorothy knew the property well. Everyone in Sloan did. Old James Morrison had died 2 years ago without any heirs, and his land had been sitting vacant ever since. It was good land, with a reliable creek running through it and enough timber to build a fine house. But it was also isolated, a good hour's ride from town. "That would be a lonely place to live," Dorothy said quietly. Martha gave her a shrewd look. "Perhaps he likes solitude. Or perhaps he is hoping to find someone to share it with." Before Dorothy could respond, Clara appeared at her elbow, her face flushed with excitement. "Come with me," she hissed. "Reverend Thomas wants to introduce us." "Clara, no, I do not think that is a good idea." But Clara had already grabbed her arm and was pulling her forward through the crowd. Dorothy stumbled along behind, her heart pounding in her chest. This was mortifying. Everyone would see what Clara was doing, this transparent attempt to push Dorothy at the new man in town. "Mr. Vandermeer," Reverend Thomas was saying as they approached, "I would like you to meet 2 of our longtime residents. This is Miss Clara Marlowe and her sister, Miss Dorothy Marlowe." Flynn Vandermeer turned to face them, and Dorothy found herself looking up into those blue eyes again. Up close, he was even more imposing, his sheer size almost overwhelming. But there was a gentleness in his expression that surprised her, a softness that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. "Madam," he said to Clara, nodding politely. Then his gaze shifted to Dorothy and something flickered in those pale eyes, a flash of recognition perhaps. "Madam," he said again, his voice deep and quiet. "Mr. Vandermeer," Dorothy managed, proud that her voice came out steady. "Welcome to Sloan. Thank you kindly." He held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly proper, and Dorothy felt heat rising in her cheeks. Clara, never one to let silence stand, immediately launched into conversation. "We heard you are looking at the Morrison property. It is beautiful land, truly. My sister and I have driven past it many times. Dorothy is quite the expert on gardening and such. She could tell you all about what grows well in this area." Dorothy wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Clara could not have been more obvious if she had hung a sign around Dorothy's neck reading, "Available spinster, please inquire within." But Flynn Vandermeer did not seem to notice Clara's machinations, or if he did, he was too polite to show it. "Is that so?" he said, his attention still focused on Dorothy. "I would appreciate any advice you could offer. I have lived in the mountains for so long, I am afraid my knowledge of proper farming is rather limited." "I am hardly an expert," Dorothy protested. "I just have a small garden." "I am sure you are being modest," he said, and was there the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Would you be willing to share some of that knowledge? I would be grateful for the help." Before Dorothy could respond, Clara jumped in again. "Of course she would. Dorothy would be happy to help in any way she can. Perhaps you could visit our property and see her garden. Then you would have a better idea of what might work on your land." "Clara," Dorothy said sharply, finally finding her voice. "I am sure Mr. Vandermeer has more important things to do than look at vegetable plants." "On the contrary," Flynn said, his eyes still on Dorothy. "I would be very interested, if the offer stands, of course." Dorothy opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "The offer stands. You are welcome to visit whenever it suits you." "Tomorrow afternoon," he suggested, "if that is not too soon." "Tomorrow is fine," Dorothy heard herself say, despite the panicked voice in her head screaming at her to make an excuse. "Then I will see you tomorrow, Miss Marlowe." He tipped his head to her, then to Clara, and moved away to continue his introductions. As soon as he was out of earshot, Clara grabbed Dorothy's arm and squeezed. "Did you see the way he looked at you? Dorothy, I think he is interested." "He is being polite, nothing more," Dorothy said, but her heart was racing. "And I cannot believe you invited him to our home. What are we going to talk about? What if he expects tea and cakes? We have barely enough sugar for ourselves." "We will manage," Clara said breezily. "Oh, Dorothy, this could be exactly what you need. A strong man with money and prospects, looking to settle down. You could not ask for better." Dorothy glanced across the room to where Flynn Vandermeer was speaking with the mayor. He looked uncomfortable surrounded by so many people, she realized. His broad shoulders were tense, and he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot as if he wanted to bolt for the door. A mountain man, she thought. 15 years alone in the wilderness. What would such a man want with a dried-up spinster like her? Clara was setting her up for heartbreak, pushing her towards something that could never be. But even as she thought it, Dorothy caught Flynn looking back at her, and once again, their eyes met across the crowded room. This time, he definitely smiled, a small quirk of his lips that transformed his weathered face and made Dorothy's breath catch in her throat. "Perhaps," whispered a tiny voice in the back of her mind. Perhaps Clara was right. Perhaps it was not too late after all. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Dorothy found herself unable to concentrate on conversations, constantly aware of where Flynn Vandermeer was in the room. She noticed that while he spoke to many people, he kept his distance from the younger, unmarried women who tried to catch his attention. Instead, he seemed more interested in talking to the older men about land prices and building techniques. When the social finally ended, and Dorothy and Clara made their way home in their small wagon, the night air was cool and filled with the sound of crickets. Clara chattered the entire way, making plans for the next day, suggesting what Dorothy should wear and how she should fix her hair. "You need to make a good impression," Clara insisted. "This might be your last chance, Dorothy. You cannot afford to waste it." "I am not trying to impress anyone," Dorothy said, but it was a lie. She was already thinking about what she would say to Flynn Vandermeer, how she would explain her humble garden without sounding pathetic or desperate. That night, she lay awake for hours, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. What did a mountain man see when he looked at her? Did he see a capable woman who could help him build a life? Or did he simply see a lonely spinster, so desperate for companionship that she would settle for anyone? And more importantly, what did Dorothy want? After so many years of telling herself that she was content alone, was she brave enough to hope for something more? The next afternoon, Dorothy had changed her dress 3 times before Clara finally lost patience and told her the second one was fine. It was a simple blue calico, worn but clean, with a white collar Dorothy had carefully mended just that morning. Her hair, which tended toward unruliness, was pinned back in a neat bun. She thought critically in the small mirror exactly like what she was, a woman of 37 trying too hard to look presentable. "Stop fussing," Clara commanded. "You look lovely. I look nervous. You look interested, which is good." Men like to know their attention is appreciated. Dorothy turned from the mirror. "Clara, I need you to promise me something. When he arrives, please do not hover. Please do not make obvious comments or embarrass me." Clara put a hand over her heart in mock offense. "Would I do such a thing?" "Yes, you absolutely would." "Fine," Clara sighed. "I will make myself scarce. But only because I want this to work, Dorothy. I truly do." The sound of hoofbeats outside interrupted any response Dorothy might have made. Her heart leaped into her throat. He was here. Flynn Vandermeer rode a large bay horse that seemed barely adequate for his size. He dismounted with easy grace and tied the horse to the fence post before approaching the house. Dorothy watched through the window as he removed his hat and ran a hand through his long hair, looking as nervous as she felt. Clara gave Dorothy a gentle push toward the door. "Go, and remember, be yourself." Dorothy opened the door before Flynn could knock, not wanting to seem as if she had been watching for him, even though she had been. "Mr. Vandermeer, you found us easily, I hope." "Your directions were clear, Miss Marlowe." He stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking uncertain. "I hope I am not too early." "Not at all. The garden is around back. Would you like some water before we go look at it? You must be thirsty from the ride." "That would be kind of you, thank you." Dorothy led him inside, acutely aware of how humble their home must seem to him. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once, with just 2 small bedrooms branching off to the side. The furniture was old and mismatched, the curtains were faded, and the whole place had a tired, worn look that no amount of cleaning could disguise. But Flynn did not seem to notice or care. He accepted the cup of water Dorothy offered and drank it gratefully. "This is a nice place you have here, cozy." "It is small," Dorothy said, unable to keep the apologetic note from her voice, "but it serves our needs." Clara appeared in the doorway of her bedroom, gave them both a brilliant smile, and announced she was going to visit Margaret Patterson. "I will be gone for a few hours at least," she said meaningfully. "Please take your time showing Mr. Vandermeer the garden, Dorothy." After Clara had left in a flurry of skirts and barely suppressed glee, an awkward silence fell over the room. Flynn set down his empty cup and looked at Dorothy, and she looked back, and neither seemed quite sure what to say. Finally, Dorothy cleared her throat. "Shall we look at the garden?" "Please." She led him out the back door and into the yard, where her modest garden spread out in neat rows. In the harsh Nevada climate, getting anything to grow required constant vigilance and careful water management. But Dorothy had learned over the years, and her garden showed the results of that hard-won knowledge. Flynn walked slowly between the rows, examining the plants with genuine interest. "These tomatoes are doing well. The soil here is better than I expected." "I have been amending it for years," Dorothy explained, relaxing slightly as they fell into the familiar topic. Composting every bit of organic matter I can find. The native soil is too alkaline for most vegetables, so you have to work to balance it. What about water? How do you manage in the dry season? There is a creek about half a mile from here. I haul water in barrels on the wagon. It is hard work, but necessary. The Morrison property has that year-round creek running right through it, though. You would have a much easier time than I do. Flynn knelt down to examine the base of a squash plant, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he lifted a leaf. You have built something good here, Miss Marlowe. This takes knowledge and dedication. Dorothy felt a flush of pride at the compliment. Thank you. It has been a learning process, I will admit. When my parents died and left this place to Clara and me, I did not know the first thing about keeping a garden. But we needed to eat, so I learned. He looked up at her from his kneeling position, and the sun caught in his eyes, making them almost glow. You are a survivor. I respect that. Something in his tone made Dorothy's breath catch. The way he said it, with such quiet certainty, made it sound like the highest compliment he could offer. She found herself wanting to know more about this mountain man who had spent 15 years in the wilderness and now wanted to settle down. May I ask you something, Mr. Vandermeer? Flynn, he said, standing up and brushing dirt from his knees. Please call me Flynn. Flynn, she repeated, liking the way his name felt in her mouth. Why now? Why are you choosing to leave the mountains after all this time? He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting out toward the desert horizon. I am 39 years old, he said finally. I have spent more than half my life alone, living rough, moving from place to place with the seasons. It was enough for a long time, more than enough. But lately I have been feeling that something was missing. A home, roots, purpose beyond just surviving. And you think Sloane can provide that? He turned to look at her directly. I think it is worth trying to find out. There was something in his expression, something warm and hopeful that made Dorothy's heart skip. Was he talking about more than just land and a house? Was there something else he hoped to find in Sloane? The Morrison property would suit your needs well, Dorothy said, steering the conversation back to safer ground. The land is good, and that creek never runs dry even in the worst drought years. You would have everything you need to build a proper homestead. Would you like to see it? Flynn asked suddenly. The property, I mean. I have permission from the land office to walk the grounds. I would value your opinion on it. Dorothy hesitated. Going out to an isolated property alone with a man she barely knew was hardly proper. Clara would have fits. Never mind what the rest of Sloane's gossips would say if word got out. But when Dorothy looked into Flynn's pale blue eyes, she saw nothing threatening or improper. She saw only honest interest and perhaps a touch of loneliness that mirrored her own. I would like that, she heard herself say. When were you thinking? Now, if you are willing, we have a few hours of good daylight left. Dorothy should have said no. She should have made up an excuse or at least insisted on waiting for Clara to return so she could accompany them. But something reckless and unexpected had taken hold of her. Some part of herself she thought had died with Samuel all those years ago. Let me get my bonnet, she said. Flynn's face broke into a genuine smile, and Dorothy felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with nervousness. She hurried inside, grabbed her bonnet and a shawl, and left a quick note for Clara explaining where she had gone. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she went back outside to where Flynn was waiting. He helped her up onto his horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist, then swung up behind her. Dorothy had not been this close to a man in over a decade, and the solid warmth of Flynn's body behind hers, the strength of his arms on either side of her as he took the reins, made her feel things she had thought herself too old to feel. Comfortable, he asked, his voice close to her ear. Yes, Dorothy managed, though her heart was hammering so hard she was certain he must feel it. They rode out of the yard and onto the road that led up into the foothills. Flynn kept the horse at an easy pace, and after a while, Dorothy began to relax against him, letting his solid presence anchor her. The afternoon sun was warm but not oppressive, and a light breeze carried the scent of sage and pine down from the mountains. "Tell me about the mountains," Dorothy said, surprising herself. "What is it like up there?" Flynn was quiet for a moment, as if considering his answer. "Peaceful," he said finally. "Harsh sometimes, dangerous even, but peaceful in a way nothing else in my life has ever been. You are alone with yourself up there. No noise, no crowds, no expectations. Just you and the land and the sky. It sounds lonely." It was. But I think I needed that loneliness for a while. After the war, after everything I saw and did, I needed the silence to put myself back together. Dorothy twisted slightly to look at him. "You fought in the war?" "Yes, for the Union. I joined up when I was 17, too young and too eager to understand what I was getting into. By the time it ended, I was 21 and felt like an old man. I could not face going back to regular life, back to towns and people who had not seen what I had seen. So I went to the mountains instead." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Dorothy heard the pain beneath it. She understood now why he had spent so long in isolation, and why coming back to civilization must be so difficult for him. "I am sorry," she said softly, "for what you went through. It was a long time ago. I made my peace with it eventually, but thank you for saying so." They rode in comfortable silence for a while longer, until the road curved up into the foothills and the Morrison property came into view. It was beautiful land, Dorothy had to admit. The creek Flynn had mentioned wound through a small valley, creating a green ribbon of vegetation in the otherwise brown landscape. Pine trees clustered on the slopes, and rocky outcroppings provided natural windbreaks. Flynn dismounted first, then helped Dorothy down. His hands lingered at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, and when Dorothy looked up at him, she saw something in his expression that made her pulse race. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing at the land spread out before them. Dorothy forced herself to focus on the landscape rather than the man beside her. "It is good land. The creek means you can have a proper garden, maybe even some fruit trees if you plant them in the right spots. There is enough timber for building, and those rocks would make a good foundation for a house. I was thinking of building it there." Flynn pointed to a level spot near the creek, but elevated enough to avoid flooding, with the front facing east to catch the morning sun. Dorothy could picture it in her mind, a solid log house with a wide porch surrounded by cultivated land and tall pines. It would be beautiful. It would be a real home. "You could be happy here," she said, and realized she meant it. "I could," Flynn agreed. "If I had the right person to share it with." The words hung in the air between them. Dorothy's throat went dry. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? After one meeting and one afternoon looking at gardens. Flynn turned to face her fully, and Dorothy was struck again by his sheer size, the breadth of his shoulders and the power evident in every line of his body. But there was nothing threatening about him. If anything, he looked vulnerable, uncertain in a way that made him seem more human and less like some legendary mountain man. "Miss Marlowe," he began, then paused. "Dorothy, may I call you Dorothy?" "Yes," she whispered. "Dorothy, I am not a man who believes in wasting time or dancing around the truth. I am 39 years old, and I have spent too many years alone to want to spend any more that way. When I saw you in town last week, when our eyes met, I felt something I have not felt in a very long time. Hope, maybe, or possibility. Dorothy's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. "Flynn, I am 37 years old. I am not a young woman anymore. I am not beautiful or charming or any of the things men usually look for in a wife." "You are wrong," Flynn said quietly, taking a step closer. "You are capable and strong and honest. You are a survivor like me. You understand hard work and sacrifice. And you are beautiful, Dorothy, even if you cannot see it yourself." Tears pricked at Dorothy's eyes. No one had spoken to her like this in so long. No one had seen her as anything other than the practical sister, the aging spinster, the woman who had missed her chance. "My sister says I am too old to wed now," Dorothy said, her voice trembling. "She says I have missed my chance at happiness." Flynn reached out slowly, giving Dorothy time to pull away if she wanted to, and gently cupped her face with one large, calloused hand. His touch was incredibly gentle despite his obvious strength. "Your sister is wrong," he said firmly. "Love has no age, Dorothy. It has no deadline. If you will have me, if you are willing to take a chance on a mountain man who is probably too rough around the edges for polite society, then I would like to court you properly. I would like to see if this feeling between us is real or just my imagination." Dorothy found herself leaning into his touch, drawn to this man in a way she could not fully explain. "It is not just your imagination," she whispered. Flynn's expression transformed, joy lighting up his weathered face. "Then you will let me court you. You will give me a chance to prove that I can be the man you deserve." "Yes," Dorothy said, and felt as if she were stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. "Yes, Flynn, I will give you that chance." He leaned down slowly, his intentions clear, giving Dorothy every opportunity to turn away. But she did not turn away. When his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and questioning and full of carefully restrained passion, Dorothy felt something inside her crack open, some wall she had built years ago finally crumbling. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing heavily, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I have been alone for so long," he said quietly. "I had almost forgotten what it feels like to want someone, to need someone. Thank you for giving me this chance." "I am the one who should be thanking you," Dorothy replied, "for seeing something in me worth pursuing, for making me feel like it is not too late after all." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's presence, while the Nevada sun began its descent toward the horizon. Around them, the land that would become Flynn's home spread out in all its harsh beauty, waiting for the life that would soon transform it. Eventually, reluctantly, Flynn pulled back. "I should get you home before it gets too late. I do not want to give your sister reason to worry. Or reason to murder you for keeping me out past dark," Dorothy added with a small smile. Flynn laughed, a deep, rich sound that Dorothy realized she wanted to hear more of. "I have faced down grizzly bears and mountain lions, but I suspect your sister might be more dangerous than both combined." They rode back to town in the gathering twilight, and this time Dorothy did not hesitate to lean back against Flynn's solid warmth. They spoke little, but the silence was comfortable, full of promise rather than awkwardness. When they reached Dorothy's house, a light was burning in the window, meaning Clara had returned. Flynn helped Dorothy down from the horse and walked her to the door. "May I come calling tomorrow?" he asked. "I would like to continue our conversation." "I would like that too. And perhaps you would join me for supper later this week. There is a restaurant in town, nothing fancy, but the food is decent." Dorothy felt a flutter of nervousness. Going to a public restaurant with Flynn would announce to all of Sloane that they were courting. There would be talk, speculation, judgment. At 37, Dorothy had thought herself beyond caring what people thought. Now she realized she did care, at least a little, but when she looked at Flynn's hopeful expression, she knew her answer. "I would be honored." His smile could have lit up the entire Nevada desert. "Then I will see you tomorrow, Dorothy Marlowe." He tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and rode away into the darkness. Dorothy stood on the porch watching until he disappeared from view, her heart so full she felt it might burst. The door flew open behind her and Clara appeared, eyes wide with curiosity. "Well, tell me everything. Where did you go? What did you talk about? Did he kiss you?" Dorothy turned to her sister, unable to keep the smile from her face. "He asked to court me, properly." Clara let out a squeal that probably woke half the neighborhood. She grabbed Dorothy's hands and danced her around the porch. "I knew it. I knew he was interested. Oh, Dorothy, this is wonderful. This is perfect." "Clara, it is just courtship. We barely know each other. But he wants to know you. Do you not see what this means? You have a chance, Dorothy. A real chance at happiness." Dorothy let herself be pulled into the house, let Clara chatter and speculate and plan. But in her mind, she was back at the Morrison property, feeling Flynn's gentle touch on her face, hearing him say that love had no age or deadline. Maybe, just maybe, it was not too late after all. The next weeks passed in a whirlwind that left Dorothy dizzy with joy and terror in equal measure. Flynn came calling every day, bringing small gifts. Wild flowers picked from the mountains, a rabbit he had trapped and cleaned for their supper, smooth river stones he thought pretty. They talked for hours, discovering shared values and unexpected common ground. Flynn told her about his years in the mountains, about tracking elk through deep snow and watching eagles soar over pristine alpine lakes. He spoke of the loneliness too, the long winters when he would go weeks without hearing another human voice. Dorothy shared her own stories, her memories of Samuel and the grief that had nearly broken her, the hard years of learning to survive after her parents died, the complicated relationship with Clara. "She loves you," Flynn said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. "Your sister. She pushes because she cares. She pushes because she cannot stand the thought of anyone being content without a husband," Dorothy replied, but there was no heat in her words. The truth was, Clara's meddling had brought Flynn into her life, and for that, Dorothy could forgive her sister almost anything. Flynn reached over and took Dorothy's hand, his large fingers gently intertwining with hers. The gesture had become familiar over the past weeks, but it still sent warmth flooding through Dorothy's body. "Are you content?" Flynn asked quietly. "With me, with how things are progressing between us?" Dorothy looked at their joined hands, his so much larger and darker from sun exposure, her smaller but equally work-worn. "I am more than content, Flynn. I am happy. Genuinely happy in a way I had forgotten was possible. Good, because I need to ask you something important." Dorothy's heart skipped. She turned to face him fully, trying to read his expression in the fading light. Flynn took both her hands in his now, his blue eyes serious. "I know we have only been courting for a few weeks. I know most people would say it is too soon. But Dorothy, I have lived alone for 15 years. I know my own mind and I know what I want. I want you. I want to build a life with you on that land we looked at together. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to grow old with you." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "Flynn, marry me, Dorothy Marlowe. I am not a fancy man and I cannot offer you wealth or status, but I can promise you that I will work hard every day to make you happy. I will protect you and provide for you and love you for however many years the Lord sees fit to give us. Please say yes." For a moment, Dorothy could not speak past the lump in her throat. All the years of loneliness, all the nights she had lain awake wondering if she would die alone and forgotten, all the times Clara had reminded her she was too old to wed now, it all came rushing back. And here was this man, This strong, gentle, impossibly kind man asking her to spend the rest of her life with him. "Yes," Dorothy whispered. "Yes, Flynn, I will marry you." Flynn let out a breath that might have been a laugh or a sob or both. He pulled Dorothy into his arms, holding her close, and she could feel his heart pounding against her cheek. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, while the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. When they finally pulled apart, Flynn reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. "I made this for you," he said, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a ring. It was not a fancy store-bought ring with a precious stone. Instead, it was silver, clearly handcrafted, with intricate engravings of pine trees and mountains around the band. "I made it from a silver dollar," Flynn explained as he slipped it onto Dorothy's finger. "I learned silversmithing from a Mexican craftsman I met in my trapping days. It is not much, but I wanted you to have something made by my own hands." Dorothy stared at the ring through tear-blurred eyes. It fit perfectly, the silver warm against her skin. "It is beautiful, Flynn. It is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." They kissed then, longer and deeper than before, and Dorothy felt the last of her defenses crumble away. She was truly, completely in love with this man, and the knowledge was both terrifying and exhilarating. The door opened behind them and Clara stepped out, took one look at them and let out another of her trademark squeals. "You are engaged? When? How? Why did no one tell me?" Dorothy laughed and held up her hand to show the ring. Clara grabbed it, examining the silver band with wide eyes. "Oh, Dorothy, it is perfect. When is the wedding? Where will you live? There is so much to plan." "Soon," Flynn said, his arm still around Dorothy's shoulders. "I am buying the Morrison property next week. I want to start building our house right away, and I would like Dorothy to be my wife when we move into it." Clara's eyes went even wider. "Next week? But that is barely any time at all to plan a proper wedding." "We do not need anything elaborate," Dorothy said firmly. "A simple ceremony with the reverend, a few friends. That will be more than enough." Clara looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Dorothy's expression must have stopped her. Instead, she smiled and hugged her sister tightly. "I am happy for you, Dorothy, truly happy. And I am sorry for all those things I said about you being too old to wed. I was wrong and I was cruel, and I hope you can forgive me." Dorothy hugged her back. "Already forgiven." They held the wedding on a warm Saturday afternoon in late August, exactly 5 weeks after Dorothy and Flynn had first spoken at the church social. The ceremony was held at the small church in Sloan, with Reverend Thomas presiding and about 30 townspeople in attendance. Dorothy wore a simple cream-colored dress that Martha Chen had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair that Flynn had picked that morning. Clara stood beside Dorothy as her only attendant, tears streaming down her face through the entire ceremony. Dorothy had expected to be nervous, but instead she felt only a profound sense of peace as she and Flynn exchanged their simple vows. "I, Flynn Vandermeer, take you, Dorothy Marlowe, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Flynn said, his deep voice steady and sure. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parts us. I, Dorothy Marlowe, take you, Flynn Vandermeer, to be my lawfully wedded husband," Dorothy replied, her voice clear despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parts us." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn cupped Dorothy's face with both hands and kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance openly wept. Dorothy kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope and gratitude into that single moment. Afterward, There was a simple celebration in the church hall with cake and lemonade. Dorothy accepted congratulations from people who, just months ago, had written her off as a hopeless spinster. Mrs. Henderson, who had first brought news of the mountain man to town, embraced Dorothy warmly. "I am so happy for you, dear," she said. "And I hope you will forgive an old woman for being surprised. I must admit, when Flynn first came to town, I never would have predicted this." "Why is that?" Dorothy asked, genuinely curious. Mrs. Henderson glanced at Flynn, who was across the room speaking with some of the local men about lumber prices. "Well, you both seemed so set in your ways, I suppose. Him with his solitary mountain life, you with your independence. But I see now that you complement each other perfectly. He needed someone strong enough to stand beside him, and you needed someone who could see past your armor to the woman beneath." Dorothy found herself tearing up again. "That is a lovely way to put it. Just promise me you will be happy, dear." At our age, happiness is not something to take for granted. "Our age," Dorothy smiled. "I am 37 and Flynn is 39. We still have many good years ahead of us." "Exactly my point," Mrs. Henderson said with a wink. As the celebration wound down, Flynn came to Dorothy's side and whispered in her ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Vandermeer, Mrs. Vandermeer." Dorothy smiled at the sound of her new name. "Yes, I am ready." They had already moved Dorothy's few possessions to the boarding house where Flynn had been staying, planning to remain there until their house on the Morrison property was completed. Flynn had hired a crew to start construction, and he spent most of his days working alongside them, determined to have a home ready for his new wife before the winter came. Now, as they walked through the quiet streets of Sloane toward the boarding house, Dorothy felt a flutter of nervousness. This was her wedding night, and she was 37 years old, not some innocent girl. She had been with Samuel briefly before he died. But that had been 14 years ago, and everything about this felt new and uncertain. Flynn seemed to sense her nervousness. He squeezed her hand gently. "We will take everything at your pace, Dorothy. There is no rush." But when they reached their room and Flynn closed the door behind them, Dorothy found her nervousness replaced by a different feeling entirely. Want. Need. Years of loneliness and longing all coming together in this moment with this man. She turned to face Flynn, and he was looking at her with such reverence, such clear desire tempered by restraint, that Dorothy felt powerful in a way she never had before. She was not too old, not too worn, not past her prime. She was a woman, and she was loved, and she was wanted. "Flynn," she whispered, and that was all the invitation he needed. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. Dorothy kissed him back with 14 years of pent-up passion, her fingers tangling in his long hair. Flynn's hands roamed her back, careful and respectful even in his obvious desire. They came together slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with patience and care. Flynn was gentle despite his size and strength, always checking that Dorothy was comfortable, that she was with him every step of the way. And Dorothy, who had thought herself too old for such passion, discovered that her body still remembered pleasure, still craved connection. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, both breathing hard. Flynn pulled Dorothy close against his chest, and she rested her head over his heart, listening to its steady beat. "I love you," Flynn said quietly into the darkness. "I know I have not said it enough, but I do." "I love you, Dorothy." Dorothy felt tears prick her eyes again. "I love you too. I did not think I would ever feel this way again, but I do. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "Do not be frightened. I am not going anywhere. We have the rest of our lives together, and I intend to spend every day proving to you that loving me was the right choice." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and when Dorothy woke in the morning to find Flynn watching her with soft eyes, she knew that this was what happiness felt like. The next months were a whirlwind of activity as they worked to complete the house before winter. Flynn was up every morning before dawn, riding out to the property to work alongside the hired crew. Dorothy often went with him, bringing food and water and offering her opinions on various aspects of the construction. The house took shape gradually. A solid two-story structure with a wide front porch, 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a living area with a massive stone fireplace that Flynn built with his own hands. It was far larger than anything Dorothy had expected, and when she questioned Flynn about it, he simply smiled. "I am hoping we will fill it," he said. "With children, maybe, if the Lord sees fit to bless us, or maybe with friends and family. I spent too many years in small, lonely spaces. I want our home to have room to breathe, room to grow." Dorothy, who had long since given up hope of having children, felt a flutter of possibility in her chest. She was 37, certainly, but not too old. Some women had babies well into their 40s. Perhaps it was not too late for that dream either. Clara came to visit often during the construction, usually bringing supplies or freshly baked goods. She and Flynn had developed an easy friendship, with Flynn tolerating Clara's tendency to offer unsolicited advice and Clara respecting Flynn's protectiveness over Dorothy. "He is good for you," Clara said one afternoon as they watched Flynn, and the crew raised the frame for the second story. "I can see it in your face. You are happy in a way I have not seen since before Samuel died." Dorothy smiled. "I am happy, deliriously, almost foolishly happy." "Good. You deserve it, Dorothy. I am sorry I was so awful to you before. All those things I said about you being too old, about missing your chance. I was projecting my own fears onto you." "What do you mean?" Clara sighed. "I am 29 years old and I am still unmarried. I kept rejecting perfectly good men because I was holding out for some fantasy that does not exist, and when I saw you getting older without a husband, it scared me. I thought if you could not find love, what hope did I have? So I pushed you, tried to force you into accepting men who were not right for you, all because I was terrified of my own future." Dorothy took her sister's hand. "You will find the right person, Clara, when you stop looking for perfection and start looking for someone who sees you as you truly are. Like Flynn sees you. Like Flynn sees me." They moved into the house on a crisp October morning, with the first hints of autumn coloring the leaves on the distant mountains. The house still smelled of fresh-cut wood and new paint, and it was filled with simple furniture Flynn had built during the evenings after construction work ended for the day. Dorothy walked through each room slowly, taking it all in. The kitchen with its large cast-iron stove and spacious work surfaces. The bedroom she would share with Flynn, with windows facing east to catch the morning sun. The 2 additional bedrooms, empty now but full of potential. The living area with its magnificent fireplace and comfortable chairs positioned to take advantage of the warmth. "What do you think?" Flynn asked nervously. "Is it everything you hoped for?" Dorothy turned to him, eyes shining. "It is more." "Flynn, it is so much more than I ever dreamed I would have." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "This is just the beginning, Dorothy. We will make this place a real home together, fill it with life and love and laughter." And they did. Dorothy planted a large garden near the creek that first autumn, preparing the soil for the spring planting to come. Flynn built a barn and acquired 2 cows, some chickens, and a pair of draft horses to work the land. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and retreating to the warmth of their home in the evenings. Winter came to the Nevada mountains with surprising force, bringing heavy snows that sometimes isolated them for days at a time. But Dorothy found she did not mind. She had Flynn, warm and solid beside her, and a house that kept out the cold and food enough to last until spring. They spent the long winter evenings reading by the fire, Flynn working on small carving projects while Dorothy mended and sewed. It was during one of these quiet evenings in late January that Dorothy realized her monthly courses had not come. At first, she dismissed it as a symptom of her age, perhaps the beginning of the change that came to all women eventually. But as the weeks passed and other signs appeared, nausea in the mornings, tenderness in her breasts, and overwhelming fatigue that sent her to bed early each night, Dorothy began to hope. She waited until she was certain before saying anything to Flynn. She did not want to raise his hopes only to have them dashed if she was wrong. But by late February, there was no doubt. She was carrying a child. Dorothy chose a quiet Sunday afternoon to tell him. They were sitting on the porch despite the cold, watching the sun paint the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold. Flynn had his arm around her shoulders, and Dorothy leaned into his warmth, gathering her courage. "Flynn, I need to tell you something." He looked down at her, concern immediately creasing his brow. "What is wrong? Are you unwell?" "No, nothing is wrong. Quite the opposite, actually." Dorothy took his large, calloused hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. You are going to be a father." For a long moment, Flynn simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, wonder spread across his face, transforming him. "A baby, truly, truly. I am about 3 months along, I think. The baby should come sometime in late summer." Flynn let out a whoop of joy that echoed off the mountains and pulled Dorothy into his arms, lifting her clean off the ground as he spun her around. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Dorothy, you have made me the happiest man alive." He set her down carefully as if she were made of glass and immediately began fussing over her. "Should you be out in the cold? Should you not be resting? What do you need? What can I do?" Dorothy laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "I am fine, Flynn. I am pregnant, not dying. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. But you are 37. Is that not more dangerous? Should we bring a doctor out here to check on you? The midwife in town has already confirmed everything. I saw her last week when you were in Virginia City purchasing supplies. She says I am healthy and strong and there is no reason to expect complications." Flynn pulled her close again, more gently this time. "I cannot believe it. A child, our child. I had given up hope of ever being a father." "And I had given up hope of ever being a mother," Dorothy whispered against his chest. "But here we are." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other and in wonder, while the sun set behind the mountains and the stars began to appear overhead. The pregnancy was not easy. Dorothy's age meant more discomfort, more fatigue, more concern from both the midwife and Flynn. But she endured it all with the same practical determination she brought to everything else in her life. The garden needed tending, the chickens needed feeding, and a coming baby meant even more work to prepare for. Flynn, for his part, became almost comically overprotective. He refused to let Dorothy lift anything heavy, insisted she rest every afternoon, and hovered whenever she attempted any task he deemed too strenuous. It was endearing and frustrating in equal measure. "Flynn, I am going to gather eggs. That is all. The chickens are not going to attack me." "But what if you lose your balance? What if you fall? Then I will get back up, brush myself off, and continue gathering eggs. I am pregnant, not made of porcelain." But Dorothy secretly loved his protectiveness, the way he looked at her growing belly with such reverence, the way he spoke to their unborn child each night as they lay in bed together. Flynn would rest his hand on her stomach and tell stories about the mountains, about the life they would have, about how much he already loved this child he had never met. Clara visited often during the spring and summer, bringing supplies and news from town. She had finally accepted the courtship of a quiet, steady farmer named Robert Greene, and Dorothy suspected there would be another wedding before the year was out. Clara seemed different now, softer somehow, less desperate to prove something. "You look happy," Clara observed one afternoon in early August as they sat shelling peas on the porch. Dorothy was enormous now, her belly round and full, the baby active inside her. "I am happy." Tired and uncomfortable and anxious about the birth, but happy. And frightened. Dorothy considered the question. "Yes, at my age childbirth is more dangerous. The midwife has been honest with me about the risks, but I am also hopeful. I have Flynn and I have this beautiful home and I have a chance to be a mother. Whatever happens, I am grateful for all of it." Clara reached over and squeezed Dorothy's hand. "You are the strongest person I know. You are going to be fine, and you are going to be a wonderful mother." The baby, a boy they named Samuel after Dorothy's first love, was born on a sweltering afternoon in late August. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Dorothy feared she might not survive it. But she had Flynn beside her the entire time, his strong hand holding hers, his quiet voice encouraging her through each contraction. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and screaming with indignation, Dorothy wept with relief and joy. Flynn cut the cord with shaking hands, then wrapped his son carefully in a blanket and placed him in Dorothy's arms. "He is perfect," Flynn whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Dorothy, he is absolutely perfect." And he was. 10 tiny fingers and 10 tiny toes, a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Dorothy held him close, breathing in that unique baby scent, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not thought possible. "Hello, Samuel," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." The first months of Samuel's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Dorothy, who had worried she might be too old to manage the demands of a newborn, found reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. And Flynn proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle with his tiny son, always ready to walk the floor with Samuel when he fussed, always eager to take his turn with nighttime feedings. On a crisp September evening when Samuel was about 3 weeks old, Dorothy sat in the rocking chair Flynn had made for her, nursing their son while Flynn added wood to the fire. She looked around the room, taking in the life they had built together, and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Flynn asked, settling into the chair beside her. "I am thinking about how wrong Clara was," Dorothy said softly. "When she told me I was too old to wed, that I had missed my chance. I am thinking about how close I came to believing her, to accepting loneliness as my fate." Flynn reached over and took her free hand. "I am glad you did not. I am glad you took a chance on a rough mountain man who barely knew how to live in civilization anymore. You gave me everything I thought I had lost, Flynn. Love, family, purpose. A home. You proved that age is just a number, that it is never too late to find happiness." "We proved it," Flynn corrected gently. "Together." Dorothy smiled and looked down at Samuel, who had fallen asleep at her breast, his tiny mouth still working as he dreamed. "Together," she agreed. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew into a strong, curious boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's practical nature. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Dorothy delivered twin daughters, Ellen and Grace, defying everyone's expectations, including her own. Flynn added onto the house to accommodate their growing family, and the once empty rooms filled with the sounds of children's laughter. Clara married Robert Greene in a simple ceremony much like Dorothy's own wedding, and they built a home not far from Flynn and Dorothy's property. The two families grew close, spending holidays together, helping each other during difficult times, celebrating each other's joys. Dorothy's garden expanded year by year, producing enough vegetables not just for their own family but to sell in town. Flynn's reputation as a skilled craftsman grew, and he supplemented their income by building furniture and doing carpentry work for other settlers in the area. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Flynn took Dorothy back to the spot where he had first proposed, the place where he had told her that love had no age or deadline. The children were spending the night with Clara and Robert, giving Flynn and Dorothy a rare evening alone. They sat together watching the sunset, just as they had that first time, though both were older now, marked by a decade of hard work and abundant joy. Flynn, at 49, had more gray in his long hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Dorothy, at 47, had her own share of silver threads and worry lines, badges of honor from birthing and raising 3 children. "You remember what I said to you here?" Flynn asked, his arm around Dorothy's shoulders. "That love has no age or deadline," Dorothy said softly. "That I was not too old, that we could still have a life together." And was I right? Dorothy leaned into his warmth, solid and familiar after all these years. "You were right, about everything." She thought about the life they had built, the family they had created, the love that had only grown stronger and deeper with each passing year. She thought about all the ways Flynn had proven, day after day, that age was irrelevant when two people truly loved each other. "Thank you," Dorothy said quietly, "for seeing something in me worth loving, for refusing to believe that my best years were behind me." Flynn kissed the top of her head. "Your best years were just beginning, Dorothy. They still are. We still have so much life ahead of us, so many more sunsets to watch together." And they did. They grew old together on that land in the Nevada foothills, watching their children grow and eventually marry and have children of their own. Samuel became a teacher in Sloan, dedicated to educating the next generation. Ellen married a banker from Virginia City and moved to San Francisco, though she visited frequently. Grace stayed close to home, marrying a rancher whose property bordered Flynn and Dorothy's land. Clara and Robert had 4 children of their own, and the two families remained close throughout the decades. Clara never again suggested that Dorothy had been too old to wed, and in her private moments, she thanked God that Dorothy had ignored her cruel words all those years ago. Flynn and Dorothy celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1928, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Flynn was 89 years old, his long hair now completely white, his powerful frame bent with age but still strong. Dorothy was 87, her face deeply lined but her eyes still bright with intelligence and humor. They sat together on the porch of the house Flynn had built for her half a century earlier, holding hands and watching the next generation play in the yard. The house had been expanded several times over the years, but the core of it remained the same, solid and sturdy like the love that had built it. "We did well, didn't we?" Flynn said, his voice softer now but still clear. "We did more than well," Dorothy replied. "We built a legacy, Flynn. Look at all of them. Our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. All of them exist because we took a chance on love, because we refused to believe it was too late." Flynn squeezed her hand gently. "Best decision I ever made coming down from those mountains. Second best was asking you to marry me. Only second best." First best was kissing you that day at the Morrison property, before I even knew if you would say yes." Dorothy laughed, the sound warm and full of decades of shared joy. "You always were a romantic underneath all that rough mountain man exterior." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The same mountains that had been Flynn's home for so many years before he found his true home in Dorothy's arms. Flynn passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 months later, at the age of 89. Dorothy held his hand as he drew his last breath, whispering words of love and gratitude for the 50 years they had shared. She wept, but they were not tears of regret. How could she regret a love that had given her everything? Dorothy lived another 3 years, surrounded by family, tending a smaller version of the garden she had kept for decades. She spoke often of Flynn to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive in story and song. She told her great-grandchildren about the mountain man who had come to Sloan looking for land and found love instead. "Your great-grandfather taught me that it is never too late," she would tell them. "Never too late to change your life, to find happiness, to fall in love. Age is just a number. What matters is the courage to keep your heart open, to take chances, to believe in possibilities." On a warm summer evening in 1931, Dorothy passed away in her sleep in the house Flynn had built for her, the silver ring he had crafted from a silver dollar still on her finger after 53 years. Her children found her the next morning, a peaceful expression on her weathered face, looking younger somehow in death than she had in years. They buried her next to Flynn on a hill overlooking the property, beneath the pines and within sight of the mountains that had been such an important part of their story. The entire community of Sloan turned out for the funeral, along with descendants who had traveled from as far away as San Francisco and Denver. Samuel, now 72 years old and still teaching despite his age, gave the eulogy. His voice broke several times as he spoke, but he pushed through, determined to honor his mother's memory properly. "My mother used to tell me about the day she met my father," Samuel said, looking out at the assembled crowd. She was 37 years old, convinced that her chance at love and happiness had passed her by. Her own sister had told her she was too old to wed, that she should accept spinsterhood as her fate. But then a mountain man came to town, and everything changed. He paused, wiping at his eyes. "My father saw what everyone else had missed. He saw a strong, capable woman who deserved to be loved. He saw possibility where others saw only age. And together, they proved that love truly has no age or deadline." They built a life that spanned 5 decades, raised 3 children, and touched countless lives. They showed everyone who doubted them that it is never too late to find happiness. My mother lived 90 years, and I can say without hesitation that every single one of those years mattered. But the last 53, the years she spent with my father, those were the ones that made her truly come alive. She blossomed under his love like her beloved garden blossomed under her care. And even now, even in her passing, she leaves behind a legacy that will endure for generations. So when people ask me what I learned from my parents, I tell them this: keep your heart open, take chances, believe in love no matter how old you are, no matter what obstacles you face. Because if a 37-year-old spinster and a 39-year-old mountain man can find each other in the harsh Nevada desert and build a love that lasts 5 decades, then anything is possible. The crowd murmured agreement, many wiping away tears of their own. After the service, people lingered, sharing stories about Flynn and Dorothy, about the impact they had made on the community, about the love that had been so evident between them even after 50 years of marriage. Years later, the house Flynn built still stands on that property in the Nevada foothills, now owned by one of Dorothy and Flynn's great-great-grandchildren. The garden Dorothy tended for so many decades still produces vegetables each summer. And on certain quiet evenings, when the sun sets behind the mountains and paints the sky in shades of gold and purple, locals swear they can still see two figures sitting on the porch, holding hands and watching the world go by together. The story of Dorothy and Flynn Vandermeer became something of a legend in Sloan, Nevada, passed down through generations. It became the story people told when someone suggested it was too late to change their life, too late to find love, too late to start over. It became proof that age is just a number, that love recognizes no deadline, that it is never too late to write a new chapter in your life story. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Dorothy and Flynn are together still. Their love as strong and enduring as the mountains that brought them together, as timeless as the stars that shine down on the Nevada desert. They proved, beyond any doubt, that love has no age or deadline, and that the human heart remains capable of transformation and joy no matter how many years it has weathered. Their story ended not with regret for time lost, but with gratitude for every moment gained, every sunrise witnessed together, every hardship endured side by side, every joy multiplied by being shared. In the end, they proved that the best love stories are not about young people falling in love. The best love stories are about people brave enough to open their hearts at any age, wise enough to recognize something precious when they find it, and strong enough to build a life together against all odds and expectations. Dorothy Marlowe, the woman who was told she was too old to wed, lived a life fuller and richer than she had ever dreamed possible. And Flynn Vandermeer, the mountain man who spent 15 years in solitude, found that coming down from the mountains was the best decision he ever made. Together, they wrote a love story for the ages, one that continues to inspire everyone who hears it. The end of their mortal story was just the beginning of their legend, a testament to the enduring power of love and the truth that it is never, ever too late to find your happily ever after.